Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Silly Mystics. My name is Melisa Desperak, and my co-host is Fayina. Beautiful, amazing,
Seriously?
spectacular, wise Fayina.
Nice one. Okay. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Wait.
Wait.
Hello.
Hello. Today, our topic is going to be negative emotions, which is very difficult for us to recreate at the moment. But seriously, I would like to ask our fair lady, Melisa, to speak about the Ides of March, because it is something that is affecting people. Many people know that in March, there tends to be a little bit more negativity in the human psyche, similar to what happens when we have the full moon. So as a collective, because March is the month before spring, before this kind of renewal, there's a little pressure percolating under the ground, and we're also feeling this pressure within ourselves. That's my take on it. But I don't know if you have something to say about the Ides of March in particular. And then we'll take it from there.
From what I initially learned about the Ides of March is that everything is just a little raw. Everything's a little more raw. Emotions are a little bit easily triggered. We tend to focus on what's not working for us. So there's a lot more friction in this time. There's a tendency to overreact.
Mm-hmm.
Try to observe yourself this month and see what comes up. And see if you could create some space between what's in front of you and what's creating friction for you, and you're reacting to it. Or maybe a whole judgment on someone who's in front of you. And ask yourself, if I'm having friction with this person, what part of that is in me? Because usually what we find that gives us friction, especially when it comes to somebody else, is that they're mirroring to us something about ourselves that still has to be looked at and examined. And a lot of people look at that and say that's not possible, especially when they have something very specific that's coming up. But if you're really honest with yourself, you'll find it. You'll find exactly what it is. We shouldn't be experiencing friction unless it's something like physically happening to us, right? Real suffering. We're talking about the mechanics of other people. And so I'd like to speak about that a little bit, if that's okay, Fayina. I mean, the concept of seeing ourselves for a moment. I know that we're not machines. We're actually sacred and beautiful. But there's a part of us that's very mechanical. And it's very important to see that we have that part. You have to see that in order to be able to overcome it.
There is this idea that we're an organism, maybe not a machine, an organism, that it's a stimulus response organism. So something is happening, we have a reaction. And we can have this reaction in a very instinctive way. So if something is coming at us, we're going to just, maybe move out of the way. We can have an emotional response. We can have a thinking response to something that's happening in our environment. So when we talk about negative emotion, we're talking about the type of emotion that has to do with the frictions and the unnecessary suffering in our lives. So I was kind of looking up what we're talking about, what are the negative emotions that we're talking about that is really prevalent in March. It's prevalent all the time, more in March, is irritability, judgment and criticism, worry, that's a big one, like we're addicted to worry and concern, complaining, or taking those little minor sufferings, which would be, maybe complaining, oh, I have to do my taxes or my back hurts. Not to minimize it, but there are certain things that are not the real suffering that you're referring to. Like a real suffering is something terrible happens, tragedies, we're having a life transition event, shocks in our lives, where really intense emotion is natural, right? Intense emotion is natural. Here it's about these negative emotions that are a leakage of energy, and it's unnecessary for us. And there are ways to transform them by what you said, first to become aware of them. Like, what is the tendency of my organism, my machine, to do? And some people find that it's complaining. Like, why do we complain? It's actually a leakage of energy, complaining in conversation. But what happens when we complain? We're losing something. What happens when we worry? We're losing the energy that could be used for creating something, for connecting to someone, for connecting to ourselves. So this is a spiritual concept, the non-expression of negative emotions. And the idea there is, if we learn to be more present to ourselves, to this mechanical part of ourselves that tends to judge or criticize or complain, that we're going to have the ability to have access to more energy in our lives to be used elsewhere. Because it's basically a leakage of energy. For example, because I work with clients as a therapist, the biggest leakage of energy is worry and concern, right? Anxiety and stress. And there's an enormous amount of suffering that happens during the day for the majority of people that are putting their thoughts and their emotions into worry and concern. Imagine being able to take that, what you said, like take a step back, take the perspective on what's really happening in this moment. Is it really scary, frightening, or does it really require a response right now? Or is it something that's just kind of, it's really imagination. We're spinning in our imagination. That imagination is creating negative feelings, and it's leaking our energy, because at the end of a full day of worry and concern, we're extremely fatigued, our adrenals are fatigued, we're exhausted. We're spending physical energy, we're spending emotional energy unnecessarily. So during March, it just happens to be, if we pay attention, perhaps a little bit more on the surface. Some people are already fed up with the cold weather. There's something happening collectively. But then it's more of an opportunity to see, because it's in an exaggerated form right now, to see what kind of negative emotions do I tend to express the most. I think that for me personally probably would be complaining, because it's something I grew up with, and culturally complaining is, almost like a way to have a conversation with people. If you're not complaining, you're not having a conversation. But if I brought presence into that, if I'm complaining and I'm leaking energy, I'm actually not present. I'm actually not connecting. I'm actually not using energy towards something that might be a more positive experience when I'm meeting with people, when I'm having a conversation. Like you and I, let's say, meet for coffee, and all I do is complain for an hour about my life or what's not working, instead of connecting with you and finding out what's happening in your life. Maybe we'll put our heads together and create something,
And not only that, but the interesting thing about when you express negative emotions like that, you'll be surprised. You're sharing with me, you're complaining to me, and then I'll take that, and then I will make it, like, it starts out like a little something, and I make a big thing out of it. And even you might start getting like, wait, I don't even want to even go there. But it kind of expands that. It's draining the two of us. And, the idea is to try to be alchemist and see if, even if we can catch ourselves in the midst of it. You could catch yourself in the midst of it, and if you could have just enough of that awareness that you could step away from it, it really is worth it. It's really worth diffusing that and backing out of it. Otherwise, you complain to me, we have this whole, and I take it to someone else, and then before you know it, everyone is expressing negative emotions. But I wanted to, you were saying that for you it's complaining. For me, it's a lot of times, at least lately, is when someone says something to me that's a photograph. And sort of someone photographs me.
You have to explain what that is.
Okay, so a photograph is when I'm going through life and I'm maybe being triggered or being instinctive, and someone says to me, Melissa, you don't have to be so harsh, for instance, sometimes, or you don't have to, maybe you could show more kindness.
So they're like mirroring back an observation, that they're observing something about your behavior.
Right. It's when someone says it, and it's like a photograph,
Yeah.
or someone saying, makes you feel like you're not smart, or that you're not loving enough or kind enough. These are photographs that we can get from people in our life. And when you think that you're kind, when you think you're smart, when you think that you have, the photograph could be difficult. And there's a tendency to overreact to that. And for me, those are the types of, and what I love about that, when I do receive a photograph and it creates friction in me, at least at this point in my life where I've done so much work on myself, it's kind of refreshing for me to see it. Because to me, it's like, oh, wow. I still got that. I mean, there's still that trigger. That's still there's something there that it's old and something that I thought I had worked on, but it's still there. And it goes back to that phrase, know thyself. Because once you get to a point where you really understand all parts of you, even that part that tends to be triggered by certain photographs, then when you start to receive them in life, if you're really aware of them, then they don't trigger you anymore, because you know you have that. And you're like, okay, I get that. I know I'm feeling friction, because what happens is, as an organism, you were talking about before, we're going to have the frictions no matter what. It's not like we're not going to have them. We're human beings. We're going to have emotions, but it's what you do with it. It's if you can have scale, then you can diffuse it very quickly, because you know where it's coming from. You're like, oh, that's the part that, or that's the other part that, and then you just don't go there. And you could even make fun of yourself, because you know it's true. There's a truth to it. That's the part. It's like when someone's mirroring something to you, there's a truth about, there's something still in you that you need to look at.
I was just thinking how useful what you're describing is self-observation, how useful it is to almost track the type of negative emotion we have and in what instances we have it, because there's usually a pattern. If we're not bringing awareness into those situations, then we're going to be on autopilot. We're just going to be a bundle of emotions, responding here, responding there, negatively, not negatively. You know, it's really a mess if you think about it. We're like a ping pong ball that's bouncing around. But if you, if I have awareness, right? If I have awareness that I tend to have negative emotions in such and such a situation, like you said, if somebody's telling you what they're observing about you and you're having a response, and I can just pause and see what this is about for me. Often we can understand what it's about. And somehow that is part of the transforming of the negative emotion. When we bring awareness to these things, they lose its potency. They start to slowly dissipate. You know, if somebody came to me and say, look, Fayina, you complain a lot. You know, like they actually gave me this photo. I give it to myself because I have awareness of it now. But if someone gave it to me, and it would shock me, sometimes we're shocked into this awareness, maybe I do complain a lot. Then I start to contemplate it. I could take it to a place of being hurt or rejected, or I can take it to a place of, okay, what is this about for me? Why do I do that? And I might find a reason that maybe it's a filler for me. It's a filler in conversation, or I'm not comfortable in my own skin in a certain situation, so I go to what's familiar. You know, there's so much there. And once we get the message from that, it doesn't have to show up anymore. Maybe the complaining is no longer a go-to for me. I definitely I think that like the saving of the leaking of energy is so important, because negative emotion always doesn't feel good in the body. and it like you said, it affects other people. It's contagious. When I complain, someone else complains with me. I also wanted to share another example of judgments, which are negative emotions. When we're judging another person, we're creating negativity, our opinion about that person. Maybe we feel better in some way because we're comparing ourselves. But if we're sharing it in a group, I'm just speaking about this because I was on a social occasion last night, and there was judgments happening at the dinner table, and people join in with the judgment, and it just doesn't feel good. There's something about the negative emotions that we're talking about. It doesn't feel good. And usually there's no awareness there. It's autopilot. People are just judging and spilling and spewing, people, including myself. And again, if there's this like pause just for a minute, like what's going on? How come this doesn't feel good to me? That kind of pause and observation. And then maybe a realization that this is some sort of, again, autopilot response, a tendency to go towards the negative. That's not necessary. And that could be transformed by saying, you know what, I don't want to talk about this, or I don't want to talk about these people. What do I know about them? I'm just judging them based on how they look, that type of thing. So all of these like minor kind of negativity that are built into us as human beings can be released. And in its place, usually there's this incredible opening, like openness. You let go of one negative emotion, something opens. We're transforming the emotion into a very powerful source. And that is part of the awakening process, right? We're going to talk about awakening. And being a mystic is being able to track our negative emotions and the patterns, understand their origin, and then not express it. Even if it's going to happen, but as much as possible, don't go there. Stay in the awareness and the observer.
Yeah.
Bring presence to the situation, and magic happens. Oftentimes magic happens.
I find that there's something also, it's like when you're expressing negative emotions, it's like we need to look at ourselves for a moment, just for a moment, as a machine.
Mm-hmm.
We have a soul, we have spirit, but there's a part of us that's a body having a physical experience. And we have to realize that this is programmed. We have a certain, we've been taught, like you were saying, culturally, you learned to complain. So there's a programming that goes on.
Yeah.
We're programmed to, our belief systems are programmed since very young. And so my invitation is, you can reprogram. You can actually go back and see what are the things, the beliefs that you have. Some people have a belief about aging and health and abundance that trumps you. So you need to look at those things, and you need to see this as a machine with a software, and look at what's running this machine, and be very intentional about the impressions that you receive also. And we're talking about negative emotions. When you're expressing negative emotions, it's like we have like a generator, and that's losing. That's like letting go and losing energy, like you were saying before. When you don't express them at all, you actually, just by neutralizing it, it's very, very powerful. And I just want to explain that for a moment. When you're in front of somebody and you're having an intense friction with that person, and your natural propensity is to respond, to react. But if for one moment you don't, there's something that happens in that moment when you're having the friction. In other words, there's a lot of energy in your body right now. The generator is getting filled. This is alchemy, but you don't express it. It is very transformative. That moment that you neutralize it by not expressing it, what you're doing is you're giving yourself the energy to be able to be present. It's quite the opposite. like maybe 100-fold. What you're preserving and what you're gaining is so much more, because that friction, then there's space for observation, then there's everything that you could you gain so much from that experience. And so the non-expressions of negative emotions allows you to preserve your energy. It allows you to change the alchemy of the situation. It allows you to understand what are your features. Features meaning, you know, I have a tendency to be controlling, or I have a tendency to want to. Many times it's fear and vanity, right? A big one. When someone says something to me that that I don't like, that doesn't make me look right or make me look good. The part, or even the part, vanity is also the part that doesn't think it's good enough. That's a big one. People don't see vanity that way.
Thank you for sharing that. The alchemist way, like being aware of the reaction in the body, like I'm angry right now or I'm disagreeing right now, and choosing not to express it outwardly, like bringing yourself into presence, choosing to kind of almost like letting the energy take you somewhere else. And then it is used in present awareness. And I also have verified that this tends to diffuse the energy of the person speaking to you, the one expressing the friction towards you. So the alchemy is not just within myself, but is now affecting another. And it's something I've experimented with, and I would definitely offer to others to experiment with in an argument with someone. The minute that you go inward and just go for the observer and go for the presence, your own, emotions disappear. And then slowly the other person stops hurling at you whatever they were doing. And they go into presence, because we are energetic beings and we're interconnected. So if we're both in anger, we're going to escalate together into fire. If one person goes into this peaceful state and drops it, the other person has nowhere else to go and refeed the fire, right? They have nowhere to keep it alive. And it's usually dropped. And two people can now connect in a different way, without the anger, without the whatever's going on, the accusation, the blame, the judgments, the criticism. That's how we can connect in a real way.
I find that when I'm in a situation where someone's saying something to me that is, if I can just make fun of myself in that moment, it's just completely the opposite, right? Then you start to laugh. Then it becomes a moment of laughter. And I don't know why we tend to be so serious, right?
I know. Humor is the best user of everything.
You think I'm like, give me an example of something that someone could say to you, you're an idiot. Yeah. It just happened to me today. I'm in the elevator and this girl says, you would think I'm an idiot. And I said, well, I didn't know who she was. And she started laughing. It was like a moment of laughter.
Yeah.
And I said to her, well, the fact that I don't know you, you know that I'm not really criticizing you. So it was easy for her to laugh at herself in that moment. And
we take ourselves so seriously and we get so hurt.
I know. Why? It's like ridiculous. I have a friend of mine that's in my life right now, and he's constantly poking at me.
Yeah, that's good.
He's constantly poking at me, and it's like, at first it was like, what are you saying, And now it's like I can appreciate it, It's like, it's nonsense. It's ridiculous. And there's no reason to get triggered. But it was teaching me something. It's the most amazing, for me, he's become my teacher. because every time he says something to me, it's like, every time I feel like, it's like, ooh, that didn't feel good, right? It's teaching me something about myself. And, you're in the work. And I say we're in the work because
we're working on being mystics.
What?
We're working on being and staying mystics.
Right. And to being present. And when someone can take you out like that so easily, like it's that vulnerability, right? We're so vulnerable. And that's the difference, right? When we're present and we're aware, those moments when someone actually triggers you, it could be funny if you could see it for what it is, because you're present. You're not, like you said, in imagination, or you're not. We just take ourselves so seriously. It's refreshing when, and I feel like I'm gonna keep this person around because
the training. Imagine being in a space where no matter what anyone says to you, you maintain that solid kind of being rooted in yourself and knowing that perhaps what they're saying is truth.
Yeah.
And you take it in, or that it's a complete lie and it doesn't affect you because you know the truth,
That's it.
To be strong
You
enough
have
not to let all of that in and just really use your own conscience, your own awareness.
It's kind of use it to sift through your being and say, okay, this didn't feel good because it's true, or
yeah,
that doesn't sound like it's me, so
haha,
whatever.
How about just take it for a minute, whatever somebody says, take it in your hand and say, is this true about me? And be honest with yourself. If someone says you're lazy, you know what? Yeah. I'm lazy. I didn't do this. You're right. You're late. You made a promise and you broke a commitment. Like taking responsibility, not taking it in and being negative and hurt, but being like, yeah, I am human.
Yeah.
Human.
I like to learn.
I'm a human mystic.
Or how about if you're not truthful, or you're not honest, or
you
to
own
betrayed
it.
me. And there's so many things that people could say that it's like, whoa, it's like, ouch.
Imagine how much less we would feel negative if we weren't so sensitive to wanting to always be right or to look good and to have those appearances that everything's perfect with us. I think that it's really important sometimes to share a positive observation about somebody, because we're wired. By the way, this is called in psychology negativity bias. Our brain is wired towards the negative. It just is. To observe what's wrong, to criticize in people, and to offer negative photographs. I'm observing your behavior, that you're lazy or whatever. How often do we do the opposite photograph? I just observed your kindness. I think you're so wise. You're beautiful. These kinds of observations that are also part of elevating or boosting the energy in the room, they're very transformational as well. Because you can bring a person into presence just by saying, you know what I've been watching about you? I've been watching you taking care of all those people. You're amazing. That's what we need to do more of. That's going to help transform negative emotion, to be doing more positive. Look for the positive things in your friends.
I think that should be
positive.
I think that should be at the octave for March. Octave meaning the new project for March.
Project for March.
Positive photographs to everybody. Intentionally, instead of negative, tell people what you see in them that's beautiful, magical, and just amazing, and see how you react. Because when you do that, right, when you give something, you're receiving it tenfold too. It's amazing.
And you can give it to yourself also. I mean, we can just say some nice things to ourselves, because if it's a difficult month, or if it's a difficult time during the year, it doesn't matter. When it feels like there's more negative emotion in our system, that's a time to acknowledge some positive things about ourselves. You know what? You were lazy that day, but the other day you went and you cleaned out your whole house and you were doing your taxes, and you did all these other things. I think we need to also, it would be nice if we also offered a positive kind of acknowledgement of ourselves. Give it out and give it to yourself.
Yeah. I don't know who. I was listening to a recording of a man. He was channeling, And he was telling this girl while he was in trance that if she really wanted to change, that every day in front of the mirror, to say beautiful things to herself, like you're beautiful, and whatever she needed to hear. And he says, you'll come back to me in 30 days and you're going to see that you're going to be a completely different person. So maybe we could do that too.
For the rest of March.
For the rest of March.
I can read 2 quotes by famous philosophers, ancient philosophers, about negative emotion or negativity.
Okay.
Marcus Aurelius advised, take away thy opinion, and there is taken away thy complaint. That's a good one. It's just like a... And Epictetus, I don't know how to say his name. Epictetus.
Okay. I'm not going to try.
Epictetus.
I don't know.
Okay, if I don't
you
know.
want to chime in.
Totally okay if I don't know, but the quote is amazing.
Okay.
When, therefore, anyone provokes you, be assured that it is your own opinion which provokes you. Similar.
Opinion of yourself, right?
Yes, you think you're so great. So in March, we're going to, say positive things to friends and families, like start to observe the good things. Observe what's good in your life, almost like a gratitude exercise or an acknowledgement exercise of yourself and others.
And make an effort not to express negativity, and see how that feels, and experiment with that.
Mm-hmm. And from that, use the energy, that energy to stay present and observe and bring awareness into the situation and watch what happens around you. And that's part of alchemy, right? Transformational alchemy. And so we say farewell to each other.
Farewell. Beautiful, Fayina.
Oh, bellissima. Bellissima, bellissima.